Over the past few months, we have been hearing the drums of war in the Eastern Europe region, first in Belarus, then in Donbas city, Ukraine. The tension rose to extreme between the pro-Russian separatists and the Ukrainians, especially after the USA, UK, EU and the others outlined their terms and increased their involvements in this conflict. Ukraine's State Security Service detained nearly 60 people that pro-Russian political forces had sent to stage protests in the eastern city of Kharkiv, which resulted in a Ukrainian soldier getting shot dead by rebels. Why is Russia so desperate to control eastern Ukraine? And what does the USA have to do with all of this? Why is the USA so interested in a potential Ukraine-Russia war? What are the benefits for those who want to participate in this war? And will they actually get involved if the war breaks out? What is the American plan for this conflict? And finally, what is the world's position on this crisis? But before we explain all of that, let's see how did the crisis begin and what were the causes. So in this video we will discuss today's Ukraine-Russia conflict. The Ukraine crisis is a struggle for power between factions inside Ukraine. Around 45 million Ukrainians want to side with the European Union, while the remaining 5 million who have Russian ethnicity want to align with Russia. Between 1920 and 1991, Ukraine, as one of the Soviet Union's founding nations, was a major contributor to the Soviet Union's economy. The current crisis began in March 2014, when Russian Special Operation Forces invaded and captured Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. At that point, Russia claimed that it was defending its Black Sea port entry. Well, here's the important element. In 2 years before the Russian invasion, Ukraine intended to grow Crimea's natural gas reserves in collaboration with US companies. If Ukraine had succeeded, Russia would have lost one of its most important customers. That is, Russia would have lost its European market and other markets. Why collaboration with the USA? Well, USA is one of the few countries that can transfer gas via tanker ships in a liquid form and reprocess it to gas and sell it wherever needed. In the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine, a military war among Ukrainian troops and Russian-backed groups raged from 2014 to 2018. More than 10,000 civilians died as a result of the war. On November 25, 2018, Russian warships assaulted and seized 3 Ukrainian ships in the Black Sea in the Crimean port of Azov. Russia anchored a cargo vessel in the harbour, claiming that Ukraine had breached Russian territorial waters, despite the fact that both countries had signed an agreement in 2003 to ensure safe travel through the waterway. At a UN Security Council conference, those who opposed to this action said Russia's assault was illegal under the international law, since the NATO's military presence in the region has grown. Putin's assault was retaliation for his ally Viktor Yanukovych's overthrow on February 2014. Ukraine's leadership has been taken over by a pro-Western majority of parliament. The crisis arose as a result of Yanukovych's mismanagement of the budget, which prompted Ukraine to seek financial assistance. It filed an appeal to the EU and then to Russia, triggering political upheaval. When that option was discarded, those who wished to be closer to the EU objected. Yanukovych's return to Kiev and strong ties with Russia were aided by Russia's military attack. Russia backed regional groups who seized control of government buildings and police stations throughout eastern and southern Ukraine in April 2014. Some believe that these groups were initially implemented in this region by Joseph Stalin before the Soviet collapse. A fleet of Russian armoured vehicles transporting weapons to the rebels was also destroyed by Ukraine. This was the first time Ukraine had directly targeted Russian army. Ukraine registered several armoured vehicles near the Russian border at the Crimean port of Azov a few days later. It said that Russia was forming a second front for the insurgents and needed land access to Crimea via southern Ukraine. In July 2014, Russia increased its military presence at the borders. Since 2014, Russia has increased the size of its naval infantry brigade by adding an airborne battalion, bringing the total number of infantry to 30,000. It was a combat-ready force capable of launching an assault on eastern Ukraine at any time. In support of Ukrainian insurgents, Russia had also fired rockets across the border. Sanctions against Russia. NATO released satellite images revealing Russia's invasion of Ukraine's eastern border. A European Union international conference imposed new restrictions on Russia's oil and banking industries. This happened soon after Russia sent a truck convoy across the border. They were transporting aid to pro-Russian rebel-held cities in Ukraine's east. Several of those trucks were allowed to enter without permission. The United States and the European Union applied economic restrictions against Russia on July 29, 2014. 5 major Russian banks which had access to the medium and long-term funding from Europe were severely hampered by the sanctions. Exports of technology to Russia's deep-water Arctic offshore and shale oil production were also limited. Russia had been kicked out of the Group of 8. G8. The major foreign investment banks operating in Russia have announced in 2019 that they will stop doing business in the country by 2020, and Boeing United Technologies has also stopped buying titanium from Russia. In response, Russia imposed a 1-year ban on food imports from the United States and Europe. It included $300 million in poultry products from the United States. Russia's central bank lifted interest rates to combat inflation. Russia is in a recession as a result of the restrictions, and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has lowered its 2014 growth outlook for Russia from 1.3% to 0.2%. In 2014, Russia was one of the most emerging markets that experienced currency depreciation. When the Federal Reserve started to taper its quantitative ease program, which limited credit around the world, forex traders felt impact and left these markets. Despite Putin's popularity at home, restrictions were wreaking havoc on the nation's economy. Now let's take a look at the key events in the most recent Ukraine-Russia crisis. Conflict started between Russian-backed groups and Ukrainians around Donbass. Ukraine's State Security Service detained approximately 60 people that pro-Russian political forces had sent to stage protests in the eastern city of Kharkiv. A Ukrainian soldier killed by rebel fire amid rising tensions with Russia. Ukraine announced a consideration to equip itself with nuclear weapons if Ukraine does not become a member of NATO. Moscow has stationed over 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border and in annexed Crimea. Russia sent a fleet of over 20 warships to launch multiple cruise missiles in the Black Sea. US warships streaming towards the Black Sea have reportedly turned back after Russia warned the USA to steer clear of the region. But the UK warships sailed towards the Black Sea amid Russian troop buildup near Ukraine. Putin warned the West's harsh response if it crosses Russia's red lines. Angela Merkel said Russian troops are making extremely tense situations. The US expelled 10 Russian diplomats and imposes fresh sanctions. Russia expelled 10 US diplomats and blacklists 8 top American officials for sanctions imposed by the US. Joe Biden suggested a summit with Putin amid tensions over Ukraine and said now is the time for the US and Russia to de-escalate. France warned Russia of sanctions if Kremlin critic Navalny dies. Vladimir Putin signed law allowing him to rule Russia till 2036. US imposed wide array of sanctions on Russia's malign actions. Turkish President Erdogan got involved and has meetings with Putin and Zelensky. Russia ordered troops back to base after build-up near Ukraine. Putin said Russia is ready to host Ukraine president for talks in Moscow. Ukraine said withdrawal of Russian troops is not enough to resolve conflict in Donbass. US State Department spokesman Ned Price said that Washington would continue to watch very closely the situation on Russia's border, with Ukraine after Moscow said it had ordered the troops sent to the areas near the border to return to their bases. Ukraine named Herman Halushchenko as the energy minister in a shake-up after the sudden sacking of the head of state energy firm Naftogaz, which had sparked a stark warning from the country's western backers. The US State Department spokesman Ned Price said, "Respect for corporate governance, transparency and integrity in energy sector personnel appointments, whether government or state-owned enterprises, is key to maintaining confidence in Ukraine's commitment to reform." World's position. The EU thinks the more vulnerable Russia's neighbourhoods are, the more effective its military muscle flexing becomes. But strengthening their ability to defend themselves and to increase the cost of Russian military adventurism is a long-term effort that Europeans cannot launch at a short notice, especially in a crisis in which they suddenly realise they should have acted much earlier. There are plenty of proposals for how the European Union can strengthen the resilience of its eastern partners. It only needs to act on them. Therefore, EU and the USA both only give partial backing to Ukraine. According to Reuters, on April 10, 2021, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan called for the worrying developments in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region to come to an end after meeting his Ukrainian counterpart in Istanbul, adding that Turkey was ready to provide any necessary support. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held more than 3 hours of talks with Erdogan in Istanbul as part of a previously scheduled visit, amid tensions between Kyiv and Moscow over the conflict in Donbass. Erdogan said he hoped the conflict would be resolved peacefully, though dialogue based on diplomatic customs in line with international laws and Ukraine's territorial integrity. Erdogan said, "We hope for the worrying escalation observed on the field recently to end as soon as possible. The ceasefire to continue and for the conflict to be resolved via dialogue on the basis of the Minsk agreements." He added, "We are ready to provide any support necessary for this." Russian President Vladimir Putin, in a call with Erdogan, accused Ukraine of dangerous provocative actions in Donbass. Kyiv said Ukraine could be provoked by Russian aggravation of the situation in Donbass. NATO member Turkey has forged close cooperation with Russia over conflicts in Syria, Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as in the defense and energy areas, but it has criticized Crimea's annexation and has supported Ukraine's territorial integrity. It has also sold drones to Kyiv in 2019. China emphasized the vital importance of the Minsk agreements, endorsed by the Security Council, in resolving the conflict, expressing regret that the accords have not been fully implemented. A Chinese representative said that his country upholds Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and rejects external interference in that country's domestic affairs. Only dialogue, not a military solution, can lead to lasting peace, he said, stressing that China will continue to play a constructive role in resolving the conflict. President Putin held several meetings with Chinese authorities since the conflict started in Donbass, showing signs of strengthened ties between Russia and China. Why is Ukraine so important? Ukraine had been playing with a significant role and was a major contributor to the former Soviet Union's economy, as it supported agricultural production. It also provided heavy industrial machinery and raw materials to factories all over the former Soviet Union. Ukraine is one of the main manufacturers in the production of key military components, such as tanks, aircraft engines, and other industrial technologies. Some are even greater than Russia's. Even today, Ukraine continues to produce and provide for many countries, including Russia. Putin's support has risen to 80% in Russia as a result of the Ukraine confrontation. To retain his popularity, he will fight to keep Ukraine at all costs. Invasion of Ukraine becomes easier as it is not part or the member of NATO. Putin also understands that if he loses Donbass to NATO, it will bring the fall of Moscow. Therefore, Russia is heavily armed and fully prepared itself not only inside Russia but also around those regions. Why is America getting involved in Ukraine? Well, Ukraine is not all about the most recent conflict in Donbass. In order to have a better understanding of the situation, we must first look at the following. During the Trump administration, Russia was more relaxed and confident with its geopolitical expansion, especially in Africa, and partially in the Middle East and South America. Trump was actually more concerned about China and thought that he could use Russia to help the USA to stop the Chinese rise for controlling the world. Biden administration seems to have different formula for China, which is to be very hard on Russia to force Putin to support USA against China's rise. We can see the USA is trying to break the bonds between the EU and Russia, and between Russia and China. So the best place to do that is the Ukraine-Belarus region, and the second front is Caucasia around Turkic countries. But the biggest question is, will Ukraine actually get any meaningful support from NATO if and when the war breaks out? If Ukraine does not become a member of NATO, then it seems Ukraine's years-long call for the actual support from NATO might come to an end when Ukraine announces its consideration to equip itself with nuclear weapons. So the question still remains as to what kind of true support Ukraine will receive even if it joins NATO, knowing the fact that even the EU is fully aware of the lack of American support when it is absolutely needed. USA's interest for this crisis is also to find out which countries it can by all means use as allies against China. We can see that the USA was also benefiting from the disturbance of bonds between Germany, Turkey and Russia. USA struggles to show its full commitment when it comes to partnership due to its fractional economy, which is about to collapse in the near future with the fall of the US dollar. So that is why USA makes investments using different strategies and uses other methods on other countries to fight against China's rise. USA's lack of commitment and self-interested support system are driving other countries like Poland and Greece to improve their relations with Russia. Germany is trying to lead the EU and wants to cooperate with Russia as well as China. Therefore, meaningless sanctions from the USA can be expected on Germany and other repolitik maneuvering countries as well. If Ukraine gets a full backing from NATO and a conventional war takes place, it would quickly spread from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Belarus and Romania, and Moldova to Central Europe towards Poland. We also know that all European wars were based around Poland in the 19th century, during which Poland was broken down into pieces. And again, during the First and the Second World War in the 20th century, Poland was shifted to the east and then to the west. So it would be all around Poland again if we don't consider the nuclear and ballistic options. No one can predict how the wars will end, especially as the ways of war are significantly and rapidly changing. But it could result in Ukraine broken into two parts. Russia shifting left into the eastern Ukraine, Romania, Moldova shifting to the left towards the east, and Poland shifting to the west. Perhaps Russia losing borders from all around, as it already struggles with keeping its huge lands due to dramatically decreasing Russian population. The decreasing of the population has become Russia's biggest enemy, because most of Russia's citizens are not Russian Slavic Orthodox. We can understand Russia's multi-ethnic demographics and its worries when looking at the geographical size of Russia. The bottom line. With the current war in Ukraine, ties between the US and Russia have deteriorated. Attempts to reach a diplomatic agreement have been unsuccessful. NATO announced in April 2016 that the battalions will be deployed to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland to prevent further Russian aggression in the Baltic region. But we all know that more US military in these countries will cause a more hostile situation. Since 2004, the Baltic countries have joined NATO and the EU. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty obligates the US and NATO to respond should Russia invade the Baltic region. Russia uses its soft power, turning off its gas taps to sanction Ukraine. On the 4th of April, Turkish authorities detained 10 former admirals after a group of more than 100 retired senior Navy officers issued a statement that government officials tied to Turkey's history of military coups. On the 26th of April 2021, the French government has condemned an open letter signed by soldiers that said the country was heading for a civil war. Due to religious extremism, 1,000 servicemen and women, including some 20 retired generals, put their names to the letter. On the 2nd of May 2021, debates broke out over 13,000 retired soldiers plotting a coup in Germany, and the country was shaken by the news. The coup plan that broke out with the creation of a group with thousands of members in the messaging application called Telegram broke out with the news from Der Tagesspiegel, who broadcasts in Berlin, Germany. The message said, "We have sworn to protect the German people. Our people need us now. We must overthrow this government." Hasn't Scotland already had an independence referendum? Would Scots actually vote for independence? Why is it back in the spotlight now? These are the latest headlines in the UK. The key countries USA needs as alliances for this region against China are UK, EU, Turkey and Russia. But these countries are heavily trading with China. So will they jeopardize their economy for the US interests? Or help the US with fighting the Chinese master plan? Thank you for watching this video. Please like, subscribe and support our channel so we can make more videos like this. Stay safe, stay tuned.